There are moments in life that stop you cold. Moments that crack something open inside you before you even have time to brace yourself. Darius knew that feeling well, the kind that hits without warning and leaves you standing in the middle of a doorway, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to make sense of what just happened. He was a single father, 40 years old. A black man who had spent the last 8 years building a life out of early mornings, late nights, and the kind of quiet love that nobody sees but everyone who lives it knows. He wasn't looking for magic. He wasn't looking for fireworks. All he wanted was one simple evening, a few hours to remember what it felt like to be a man and not just a father. But the moment he opened the restaurant door for his blind date, the moment she leaned in close enough for him to catch the faint scent of jasmine and whispered something so soft it barely registered as sound, his entire world shifted. Because what she whispered wasn't a greeting. It wasn't a flirtatious hello. It was 5 words that made his chest tighten, his breath catch, and his heart feel like it had been split wide open. "I know your daughter helped." And just like that, the evening he had almost talked himself out of 100 times became the one he would never forget. To understand why those 5 words hit Darius the way they did, you have to understand who he was before he walked through that door. Darius Webb was 38 years old, born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, the kind of city that teaches you early on that nothing comes easy and nothing lasts forever unless you fight to keep it. He had broad shoulders, calloused hands, and the kind of face that looked serious until it smiled. And when it smiled, the whole room shifted. He worked at Holloway's Auto Repair on the east side of the city, a shop that smelled permanently of motor oil and burnt coffee, where the radio played old soul music on Friday afternoons, and the guys gave each other grief about everything except the things that really mattered. He had been a single father for 8 years. His daughter Emily was 9 years old. She was small for her age, with her father's dark eyes and her late mother's way of tilting her head when she was thinking hard about something. She was quiet in the way that deep rivers are quiet still on the surface, everything moving underneath. She loved drawing. She drew on the backs of grocery receipts, on the inside covers of her school notebooks, on paper bags she folded into little books and tucked under her pillow. Her drawings were always the same kind of thing, 2 figures side by side holding hands or sitting close, always with some small note written underneath in her looping, careful handwriting. Darius had taped dozens of them to the refrigerator over the years. Every single one. He worked long hours to give her what she needed. Not just the material things, the school clothes, the meals, the roof over their heads in the 2-bedroom row house on Clement Street, but the other things too. The things that cost nothing except time and presence. He had taught himself to braid hair by watching videos on his phone at midnight. He had learned which books she liked by reading them himself first. He had sat through more animated movies than he could count, and if you asked him about them, he could tell you the plot of every single one. Everything Darius did, he did for Emily. That was the truth of his life, and he had told himself for 8 years that it was enough. But even the strongest hearts get lonely. He didn't talk about it. That wasn't his way. He carried it the way a lot of men carry the things they can't quite name, quietly, steadily, in the space between midnight and morning when the house was still and the weight of everything became briefly, honestly visible. He didn't want to date. He didn't want to risk anything. He had Emily, and Emily had him, and he told himself that was the whole story. Then one Tuesday afternoon at the shop, his co-worker and oldest friend Trevor brought it up again. Trevor was the kind of man who thought the solution to every problem was human connection. Lost your keys? Talk to somebody. Bad week at work? Go somewhere with people. 8 years of guarding your heart like it was something that needed protecting? Absolutely, definitely. Talk to somebody. Talk. "There's a woman!" Trevor said, leaning against the hood of a 2009 Civic with the confidence of a man who had no idea he was about to start something. "Friend of my wife's cousin. Smart, good heart. Works with kids. I think you'd get along." Darius kept his eyes on the engine. "I'm good." "You always say that." "Because I always mean it." "No pictures," Trevor said. "No pressure, just dinner." Darius said no. He said no the next day and the day after that. He said no until the following Saturday afternoon when Emily happened to be sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while he was on the phone with Trevor, and she heard enough of the conversation to piece together what was being asked of her father. He didn't notice her expression change. He was too busy saying no. But later that evening, Emily appeared in the doorway of his bedroom while he was getting ready for nothing in particular, and she said very seriously, "Daddy, I think you should go." He looked at her. "Go where?" "On the date." She said it the way she said everything important, simply, directly, without decoration. "You deserve to have a good time." He didn't know what to say. He opened his mouth, closed it, and felt something move in his chest that he couldn't quite identify. "I'll help you get ready," she added, as if that settled it. The afternoon of the date, Emily was in full command of the situation. She made him wear this dark blue shirt, the one she said made him look like someone worth talking to. She stood on the edge of the bed to reach his collar and straightened it with both hands, frowning with concentration. She told him to stand still while she smoothed the front of it. She surveyed the finished result with the gravity of a general reviewing troops before battle. Then, while he was putting on his shoes, she slipped something into the breast pocket of his jacket. He felt the small, folded weight of it and reached for it. "No," she said immediately. "Not yet. Emily, it's for later." She grinned wide and certain and refused to say another word about it. When he dropped her at his sister Renee's house for the evening, Emily grabbed him around the middle and pressed her face against his chest. She was small enough that she fit perfectly there, the way she always had. "Don't be scared, Daddy," she said into his shirt. "Just be kind." He drove to the restaurant with those words running on a loop in the back of his mind. Just be kind. The place was called The Lantern. A quiet restaurant in a neighborhood he didn't know well, warm and dimly lit with wooden floors that creaked gently and candles in small glass jars on every table. He arrived 5 minutes early, which was his habit. He stood near the entrance with his hands in his jacket pockets and tried to breathe normally, which was harder than it should have been. He reminded himself he was a grown man. A man who had rebuilt a transmission by himself at 2 in the morning, who had sat in a hospital waiting room for 11 hours without falling apart, who had learned to braid a 9-year-old's hair from a series of YouTube tutorials and gotten reasonably good at it. He could handle dinner. Then the door opened. The woman who stepped inside was tall and graceful, with warm brown skin and natural hair pulled back loosely at the nape of her neck. She wore a simple dark coat and carried herself with a kind of quiet ease that immediately softened the room around her. Her eyes, when they found his, were bright and direct and completely unafraid. Darius stepped forward on instinct and held the door. She smiled genuinely, without performance, and walked past him into the warmth of the restaurant. And as she did, she leaned in just slightly close enough that he could hear her voice beneath the ambient noise of the room, and she said it. 5 words. Low and certain and strange. "I know your daughter helped." Darius stopped moving. He stood in the doorway with one hand still on the door and stared at her. The words were still registering, still arranging themselves into meaning, and he wasn't entirely sure he'd heard them correctly. "I'm sorry," he said. "What?" She turned back to him. Her expression was kind, unhurried. "I recognize the handwriting," she said. "On the note in your pocket." Darius looked down. The small, folded square of paper Emily had tucked into his breast pocket that afternoon had shifted just enough to be visible above the fabric. He had forgotten it was there. He reached in and pulled it out, feeling the heat rise along the back of his neck. "May I?" she asked. He handed it to her without fully understanding why. She unfolded it carefully and looked at it for a moment. Then she smiled. Not the polished smile of someone being polite, but something smaller and more real, the kind that reaches the eyes before it reaches the mouth. She turned it so he could see. Emily had drawn 2 figures at a table. One was tall and dark, the other small and light. They were holding hands across the table. Underneath, in Emily's careful looping handwriting, "Be nice to her. She might be lonely too." Darius felt something crack open in the center of his chest. Not from embarrassment, though there was plenty of that, but from something else. The pure, unguarded kindness of his daughter, offered without hesitation to a woman she had never met, and the fact that a stranger had somehow seen it before he had. They found their table by the window. He apologized, still flustered, still trying to reassemble himself. She shook her head. "You don't need to apologize," she said. "Your daughter is thoughtful." She paused. "And she's right." Her name was Lena. Lena Caldwell. She was 36, originally from Atlanta, now living and working in Baltimore as a speech therapist at Children's National Hospital. She had been doing it for almost a decade, working with kids who struggled to find their words, helping them build the kind of language that let them reach out to the world and be understood. She said she had seen more courage in children than in most adults. She said she believed in small gestures, the kind that most people overlook, because in her experience, those were the ones that actually held people together. Darius listened. He nodded. He answered her questions politely and asked reasonable ones in return. He was present, composed, and carefully, deliberately distant. Because standing in that doorway, hearing those 5 words, he had felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Something real and unguarded and frightening in the way that real things are frightening when you've spent years learning to live without them. And so he smiled. And he talked. And somewhere behind his eyes he built a wall. There is a particular kind of loneliness that belongs to people who have given everything for a long time. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with grief or drama. It settles quietly the way dust settles slowly, evenly, until one day you look around and realize the surfaces of your life are covered in it. Darius had been carrying that loneliness for 8 years, and he had become so accustomed to its weight that he had stopped noticing it was there. What he hadn't understood, what none of us understand, until the moment it's made unavoidable, is that loneliness is not a character flaw. It is not the evidence of weakness. It is simply the proof that we were made for connection, and that somewhere along the way, we forgot we were allowed to reach for it. Emily hadn't forgotten. She was 9 years old, and she hadn't forgotten for a single day. Sometimes the people we spend our lives protecting are the ones who see us most clearly. Emily didn't understand the complicated architecture of adult longing. She didn't know the word for what her father carried. She only knew that he deserved kindness, and that the bravest thing she could do was remind him of that, without him realizing she'd done it. A 9-year-old with a crayon and a folded piece of paper. And somehow that was enough to start everything. The dinner began the way Darius had rehearsed it in his mind-controlled, cordial safe. He asked about her work. She told him about the children she worked with at the hospital. Kids who had suffered strokes. Kids with developmental delays. Kids who had been through things that no child should ever have to go through. And the way she talked about them was unhurried and full of genuine feeling. She didn't perform compassion. She simply had it. He nodded at the right moments. He offered appropriate responses. He kept his voice even and his expression pleasant and his hands folded on the table in front of him like a man who had everything under control. But Lena was perceptive in the way that people who spend their days listening carefully to others tend to be. She noticed the distance. She didn't comment on it directly, she was too composed for that, but he could see her register it. The slight adjustment in her posture. The way her questions became a little gentler, a little more patient, as though she were approaching something she didn't want to startle. She told him about her own life. She had grown up in Atlanta, the younger of 2 sisters, raised by a mother who worked double shifts at a hospital, and a grandmother who made everything from scratch, and believed firmly that food was a form of love. She had come to Baltimore for graduate school and stayed because the city got into you in a way that was hard to explain to people who hadn't lived it. Darius listened. He found himself wanting to lean in and forced himself not to. "You like it here?" he asked. "Baltimore?" "I do," she said. "It's a real city. It doesn't pretend to be something it isn't." He almost smiled at that. Almost. The food came. They ate. The conversation moved in careful circles. Her work, his work, the neighborhood, the weather, the particular difficulty of finding a decent mechanic who didn't talk down to you when you brought your car in. On that last point, Darius had opinions, and for a few minutes he forgot to be guarded, and just talked, and Lena laughed, a real laugh, easy and unguarded. And for a moment the table between them felt smaller. Then the wall went back up. He could feel it happening, and he let it happen anyway. Because the alternative was worse. The alternative was continuing to feel what he had felt standing in that doorway, and he didn't have a name for that feeling yet, and unnamed things were dangerous. He told himself, "You're doing fine. Finish dinner. Thank her. Go home to your daughter. That's enough. That's the whole story." He had been telling himself versions of that story for 8 years. The shift happened quietly, the way the most important moments usually do. They had been talking for almost an hour when Lena set down her fork and reached into the bag hanging on the back of her chair. She did it without preamble, without explaining herself first, with the naturalness of someone retrieving something they've carried so long it has become part of them. She placed a piece of paper on the table between them. It was old. The edges had gone soft with handling, the paper itself yellowed slightly with time. It had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases had turned white. But the drawing on it was still clear, two figures rendered in the unsteady lines of a child's hand. One figure was small and hunched head down. The other stood beside it, one arm extended, touching the first figure's shoulder. Underneath, in the careful printing of a young child, "It's okay to cry. I'll stay with you." Darius stared at it. The lines, the figures, the handwriting style not identical to Emily's, but close enough in the particular way that children who draw from feeling rather than instruction tend to produce similar marks. Something about it reached through his chest and took hold of something he had been keeping carefully locked away. "My little sister drew this for me," Lena said quietly. "I was 10. She was 7. I had come home from school and told her I felt invisible, that I could walk into a room and it was like I wasn't there. I didn't know how to explain it any better than that. I was 10. She paused. She didn't say anything. She just went and got her crayons. Darius didn't speak. "I've carried it ever since," Lena said. 26 years. Through college, through grad school, through 3 apartments and 2 cities. It's the one thing I have never put in a box." Something was happening in Darius's chest that he did not have permission to acknowledge at a restaurant table across from a woman he had met 45 minutes ago. He felt it pressing against the inside of his ribs like something that had been stored under pressure for a very long time. He reached for his water glass, set it down, reached for it again. "I have to—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "Excuse me a second. I need to step outside and check on my daughter." It wasn't entirely a lie. He did think about Emily. He thought about her every hour of every day, the way you think about your own heartbeat constantly, automatically beneath the surface of everything else. But that wasn't why he stood up. Outside, the night air hit him like a hand pressed flat against his sternum. He stood on the sidewalk in front of the lantern with his phone already in his hand and called his sister Renee before he had consciously decided to do it. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, how's it going?" "Fine," he said. "Just checking in. Emily, okay?" "Emily is asleep on my couch with the TV on and a half-eaten bowl of popcorn in her lap," Renee said. "She's perfect. What's wrong with you?" "Nothing." "Darius?" He turned away from the restaurant window. The street was quiet, a few cars moving slowly through the evening, the distant sound of music from somewhere down the block. He stood very still and breathed. "She brought out this drawing," he said, "from when she was a kid. Her sister made it for her." He paused. It looked like something Emily would draw. There was a silence on the other end. "And," Renee said. "And nothing. I needed a minute." Another silence. Longer this time. "Darius," his sister said with the particular gentleness she reserved for the moments when she was about to say something he didn't want to hear. "What exactly are you running from out there on that sidewalk?" He didn't answer. "Because from where I'm standing," she said, "it sounds like you're standing outside a perfectly good restaurant in the cold calling your sister to check on a child who is asleep and fine because something inside that restaurant made you feel something. And you got scared. And you left." The word landed. Scared. He stood with it for a moment. The cold, the quiet street, the muffled warmth of the restaurant behind him, his daughter asleep on his sister's couch with popcorn in her lap. "Don't be scared, Daddy. Just be kind." He exhaled slowly. "I'll call you later," he said. "I know you will," Renee said. "Go back inside." He went back inside. Lena was sitting exactly where he had left her hands folded on the table, the old drawing still between them. She looked up when he returned, and she didn't say anything, which was the right thing to do. She simply waited. He sat down. He looked at the drawing again. Then he looked at her. "My daughter draws like that," he said. "Same kind of thing. 2 people, always together. Always some little note underneath." "I know," Lena said. "I saw. She's been doing it since she could hold a crayon." He paused. "I have a whole collection of them on the refrigerator." "That's beautiful." Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. It is. Something had loosened between them. Not completely. There was still distance. Still the residue of an hour of careful self-protection. But the shape of the evening had changed. The conversation that followed was slower, more honest, less managed. He asked her about her sister. She asked him about Emily's drawings. They talked about the particular experience of watching a child navigate the world with more wisdom than you expect them to have. It was going better. It was going genuinely, unexpectedly better. And then Lena asked the question she had no way of knowing not to ask. It wasn't careless. She wasn't a careless person. It emerged naturally from a conversation about co-parenting and school schedules and the logistical complexity of single parenthood. She said simply, "Does Emily's mom stay involved?" The table went quiet. Darius felt the question land somewhere deep and undefended. He looked at his plate. He set down his fork. He was aware of the exact quality of the silence that had opened up between them, the way Lena's expression shifted almost immediately from open to careful, the way she understood before he had said a single word that she had stepped somewhere she hadn't meant to step. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "You don't have to." "She passed," Darius said, 7 years ago. The words were simple. He had said them before to Emily's teachers, to doctors, to paperwork that required explanations. He had a practiced way of saying them that kept them at a certain distance. Clinical. Contained. But sitting here at this table in this warm and candlelit room with this woman looking at him with an expression that held no pity and no performance, just honest human attention, the distance didn't hold the way it usually did. He looked up. Lena held his gaze. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She didn't offer condolences in the reflexive, deflecting way that people often did. She simply sat with it the way someone sits with something that deserves to be sat with. "I'm sorry," she said again, and this time the words were quieter, more specific. She meant them the way you mean something when you're not trying to make the other person feel better, when you're just telling the truth. Darius nodded. "Thank you." Another silence. Longer. Neither of them moved. Then Darius reached for his jacket. It was not a dramatic gesture. He didn't push back his chair or make a production of it. He simply reached for the jacket hanging on the back of his seat with the quiet efficiency of a man who had decided something and was implementing the decision before he could change his mind. "I think I should probably call it an evening," he said. His voice was even, controlled. The voice he used when he was running entirely on reflex and keeping everything else very still. "I appreciate dinner. This has been a good evening. You're a good person." He stood up. Lena did not stand. She did not reach for him or argue or fill the space with words the way people sometimes do when they're panicking. She sat very still and watched him, and then she did one thing. She reached across the table and picked up the old drawing, her sister's drawing, the one she had carried for 26 years, and she placed it gently on the table in front of his empty chair. Then she looked up at him and said quietly, and without any edge at all, "I don't need you to tell me anything, Darius. I don't need you to explain or perform or be okay with any of this, but I want you to know something before you go." She paused. "Your daughter was braver tonight than either one of us." He had his hand on the back of the chair. He stood there. 5 words she had whispered at the door. And now this, a different kind of 5 words aimed at a different part of him. Not the part that managed and protected and held everything together. The other part. The part that had learned a long time ago to stay very quiet. "Your daughter was braver tonight." Emily, who had straightened his collar with both hands, who had refused to show him the note, who had pressed her face against his chest and told him not to be scared. Emily, who drew 2 figures holding hands and wrote underneath, "Be nice to her. She might be lonely too." And here he was, standing in a restaurant with his jacket half on, doing the exact thing he had told his daughter 100 times never to do. Not with schoolwork, not with friendships, not with anything that mattered. He was giving up. He was choosing the wall over the window, the familiar over the real, the controlled loneliness he knew over the terrifying possibility of something he didn't. He stood there for a long moment with his hand on the chair and the candle between them burning steadily and the old drawing lying on the table where she had placed it. And slowly, without saying a word, he sat back down. We tell ourselves that closing off is the same as protecting ourselves. We tell ourselves that the walls we build are structures, not prisons, that keeping people at a certain distance is wisdom, not fear. But there is a difference, a real and consequential difference between the kind of caution that guards your genuine self and the kind that simply keeps you from being seen at all. Darius had spent 8 years calling his fear by another name. He had called it responsibility. He had called it stability. He had called it doing what was best for his daughter. And all of those things were true. They were true. And they were also the vocabulary of a man who had been hurt badly enough that he had decided without quite realizing it that the cost of connection was simply too high to pay again. The tragedy is not that he felt that way. The tragedy would have been if he had walked out that door. Because what Emily understood at 9 years old, with a box of crayons and a folded piece of paper, is something that takes most of us a lifetime to learn. That kindness is not a risk. It is the only thing that ever actually reaches another person. And it only works when you are willing to stay in the room. He sat back down without explanation, and Lena didn't ask for one. That was the thing about her. She didn't need to fill every silence. She didn't reach for words to smooth over the moment or pretend it hadn't happened. She simply looked at him when he settled back into his chair, and there was something in her expression that was neither triumph nor relief. It was quieter than both of those things. It was just recognition. The look of someone who understands what it costs a person to turn around. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The restaurant moved around them, the soft clatter of other tables, the low murmur of other conversations, a burst of laughter from somewhere near the bar. The candle between them burned steadily, throwing a small circle of warmth across the tablecloth, across the old drawing still lying where Lena had placed it, across Darius's hands resting open on the table in front of him. He looked at the drawing. Then he looked at her. Her name was Diane, he said. His voice was low. Not broken. He was past the kind of grief that breaks your voice, but weighted in the way that the truth is weighted when you've been carrying it alone for a long time. We met in our mid-20s, married young. Emily came along and everything changed the way it changes when you have a kid. Everything gets harder and everything gets more real at the same time. He paused. She got sick when Emily was 2. It moved fast. Faster than anyone expected. He was quiet for a moment. Emily doesn't remember her. Not really. She has pictures. She has the stories I tell her. But she doesn't have the memory of her mother's voice, and He stopped. I have spent a lot of years trying to figure out how to give her something I don't know how to give. Lena listened. She didn't move. She didn't look away. After Diane passed, Darius continued, I put my head down. I worked. I took care of Emily. I told myself that was the job, and the job was enough. He looked at his hands. And it was. It was enough. She is the best thing I have ever done. She is the whole point. He paused again. But somewhere along the way, I think I convinced myself that taking care of her meant not wanting anything for myself. Like wanting something was selfish, like I didn't have the right. He said it plainly without self-pity in the matter-of-fact tone of a man reading something off a list he had never read aloud before. And hearing it said out loud in his own voice in this warm and ordinary room, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not the way it shifts in movies with swelling music and rain against windows. Just quietly, the way a lock turns when the right key finally finds it. He exhaled. I think, he said slowly, I have been calling my fears something else for a pretty long time. Lena was quiet for a moment after he finished. She looked at the drawing between them, then back at him. I know what that's like, she said. Not the same story, but the same feeling. She folded her hands on the table. I told you my sister drew this for me because I felt invisible. What I didn't tell you is that I felt that way for a long time, not just in school. Into my 20s, into my 30s some days. She paused. I was good at my job. I was good at showing up for other people, and I told myself that was enough. That if I could help other people find their voice, it didn't matter so much that I had trouble using my own. Darius looked at her. Your daughter's drawing, Lena said. The one she put in your pocket. When I saw it before I even knew whose it was, it stopped me. Because it looked exactly like something my sister would have drawn. And my sister was the one person in my life who always showed up. She paused. So when I walked in and I saw it in your pocket, I didn't think. I just said what I felt. You scared me half to death, Darius said. She almost smiled. I know. I'm sorry. No, he said. Don't be. He reached into his breast pocket and took out Emily's note for the first time. He had forgotten in the upheaval of the evening that he hadn't actually opened it yet. He had held it in the doorway. He had handed it to Lena. He had seen it through her eyes. But he hadn't read it himself, not properly, not the way you read something that was written for you. He unfolded it carefully. The drawing was exactly what Lena had shown him. 2 figures at a table, one tall and dark, one smaller, and light hands touching across the space between them. Emily had colored in the tablecloth red, which was a detail he hadn't registered before. She had drawn a small candle in the center, its flame rendered in bright yellow crayon. Underneath, in her careful, looping handwriting, "Be nice to her. She might be lonely too." Darius sat with it for a long moment. Then quietly, he laughed. It was the first real laugh of the evening, unguarded, surprised out of him. The laugh of a man who has just been completely and thoroughly outmaneuvered by a 9-year-old with a box of crayons. It came from somewhere low in his chest, and it broke the last of the tension at the table the way a window opens a room. Lena laughed, too. The real version of her laugh, warm, easy, unperformed. She's something else, Darius said, looking at the drawing. She really is, Lena said. He held the drawing for a moment longer, then looked at the old one, the one Lena had laid on the table between them. He reached out and picked it up, gently, turned it over in his hands. 26 years old. Handled so many times the paper had gone soft. A 7-year-old's crayon lines still clear. It's okay to cry. I'll stay with you. He set it back down and slid it toward her. She shook her head. Keep it, she said. Both of them. He looked at her. This has been with you for 26 years. I know. She held his gaze. But I think you and Emily will understand it better than I do now. She paused. Keep it to remember that kindness doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right moment to show itself again. He looked down at the 2 drawings lying side by side on the table. One old, one new. One from a 7-year-old in Atlanta a quarter century ago, one from a 9-year-old in Baltimore that very afternoon. Different hands, different paper, different years, the same message. He folded them both carefully and tucked them into his breast pocket next to where Emily's note had been all evening. They stayed another hour. The conversation that followed was different from everything that had come before. It looser, warmer, more honest. They talked about the things people talk about when they have decided mutually, and without announcement, to stop being careful with each other. She told him about her grandmother's cooking and the particular smell of her childhood kitchen on Sunday mornings. He told her about the first time he successfully braided Emily's hair and how Emily had looked at the finished result in the mirror and said with complete sincerity, "Daddy, it's almost good." They laughed about things that weren't particularly funny and talked seriously about things that were. They disagreed about one thing, whether Baltimore winters were genuinely bad or merely unpleasant. And the disagreement was comfortable in the way that disagreements are comfortable when you've already shown each other something real. When the restaurant began to thin out around them, they both noticed at the same time, and neither of them was in a rush. They walked out into the night air together. The street was quiet and cold, the sky above the city that particular shade of deep orange-gray that Baltimore gets on clear winter nights, the light pollution turning the darkness into something almost warm.